but it's really cool to be able to interview the inked shrink. I had a friend, Lauren Gregory, turn me on to your page and said, you've got to talk to this guy. He's got some amazing tattoo work, and he's an advocate for the tattoo industry, even though he doesn't sling ink, he just accepts the ink. And you've created a niche for yourself. You're a doctor. You're a huge enthusiast. You've been tattooed by over 20 amazing tattoo artists. Before we got on, I was checking out your Instagram and TikTok and looking at your great content, and you're doing some amazing things. And I really want to dig into those. But I always like to start by giving everyone your origin story. Find out where you came from and how you got into what you're into, Matt.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this, and I think we're going to have a great conversation. My tattoo origin story. Well, it's funny. I was thinking about that not too long ago, and it really started back when I was in high school. I read a Sports Illustrated article where Shaquille O'Neal was interviewed, and in the interview, he was talking about this tattoo he got. It was a Superman tattoo on his bicep, and he was talking about how much it hurt, but the fact that he pretty soon thereafter wanted to go back and get another tattoo. And this is in the early to mid '90s, and during a time when tattoos were still like sort of not mainstream by any means. But the fact that it was him, and he was a cool guy. He was the guy with these gigantic Nike shoes that he was
Yeah.
he was marketed to kids like me.
Mhm.
So that just kind of stuck with me. And by the time I got to college, I was 18, like 2 weeks after I started college. And I just went out and got my first tattoo, a little tribal sun that I picked from a flash wall about this big. And because I was such a badass, I had to get a tramp stamp, so my
Oh
parents couldn't
yeah.
see. Yeah, yeah. So that's where it started.
Mm, that's cool. That's cool. College was your first taste of it. Now, is that tattoo still around, or has it been buried under some fresh ink, some new ink?
Good question. So it was subsequently covered up with an even actually worse tattoo, which is literally essentially a black circle. uh, Thankfully, I did wind up getting that lasered, which hurt like hell, and it is now covered. So I've got a full kind of galaxy space theme back piece.
Nice. Yeah, you've got some amazing work, and as I was looking at one of the last TikToks, it just has you basically doing like a 360, showing off all your work, and it's one of those like you could just probably spend a lot of time navigating that, because you've got so much intricate work and so much high quality work too. It's amazing. But before we get there, let's keep telling your story. So you got your first tramp stamp, and then what happened? Did you get the bug from there, or I know you were going to medical school, right?
Yeah, so after that, I get a couple smaller tattoos, one on each shoulder, basically. One was like my family crest and my name in Hebrew, because half my family is from Ireland, the other half is Jewish, and we're actually Holocaust survivors. So that kind of symbolized my
Wow.
family. And then I get this other kind of random Leo zodiac sign on my arm because I'm a Leo. But yeah, so that was like all college, and then nothing for I don't know, maybe 15 years, something like that. And I decided after my daughter came, uh, I created this piece of art. Her name is Phoebe Capri. Phoebe is the goddess of the moon. Capri is an island where my wife and I honeymooned. And I created this piece of very poorly done Photoshop art that symbolizes her name. And I started thinking, man, this could be, if somebody's more artistic than me, can turn it into a really beautiful tattoo. And that's really, so you're going back about 9 or 10 years now, and that's really when my collecting, I would say, really started.
Oh man. So you have been just under the needle for the just this past decade has been your collecting period, huh? Oof.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I have probably 70% of my body, give or take, lots of gaps and such. and I've been collecting since I was 12. So,
No kidding.
I mean, don't tell my mom, but yes, I did get some tattoo work at an early age. And yes, it wasn't the best work, and it's been covered up. But just getting at is that it's been, I'm 43, right? So that's been 30 years of collecting, and I still haven't gotten as much work as you've gotten. So that's quite the dedication. And I mean, that just speaks to your personality. And again, before getting to this part where you're becoming heavily tattooed, I think it's really novel of what you do for a living. And I'd love for you to kind of speak to that, because that does, like I said, from where you came from, because I
Sure.
came from the same period, where tattoos were taboo, and now you're an advocate for them. And what you do, definitely in contrast is amazing to hear about. So definitely tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah. So I talked about how I started my real collecting with this piece to honor my family. And after that, I started having more and more ideas and building a sleeve from that. So my first big step from my standpoint in terms of reconciling getting tattooed and being a doctor was when I got some work done on my forearm. And that to me was like, okay, I really can't easily hide this anymore, especially if I'm in a short sleeve shirt or scrubs, which I was in sometimes. And so that was kind of sticking my toe into the water, I would say. And amazingly, like, the hospital I worked in didn't burn down. My patients didn't revolt against me. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
my patients only have ever said positive things, and I've gotten literally hundreds of compliments or questions from patients, and I have literally heard zero negative. Doesn't mean that some patients, I'm sure, don't like them, but overwhelmingly been positive response. So it was kind of the fact that, professionally, my colleagues didn't seem to have any particular problem, and patients liked it. So I felt more comfortable. And as I learned more about the amazing world of tattoos and all the incredible, I mean, I wish I had 100 bodies because there's so many good artists I love to collect from. But I
Mm-hmm.
started thinking, I want to collect from this person, from that person. And at a certain point, it got to where I felt like it would look weird if I had parts of my body not tattooed. So
Yep.
that's kind of how it evolved.
Mm-hmm. But getting back to, though, I mean, my understanding is are you a medical doctor or a psychiatrist, or what's the
Uh,
actual profession?
Yeah, so I am a medical doctor by my education. So I have a medical doctor degree from the University of Rochester School of Medicine. So same degree as your orthopedic surgeon or your primary care doctor or cardiologist. But after we get our medical doctor degree, then we specialize. So my specialty
Yeah.
happens to be psychiatry. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. I do have a really cool primary care doctor myself, and he's actually younger than me, just a tad bit. And I gave him his like second tattoo.
Oh,
He's,
cool.
yeah, he had like a really old tattoo did years ago, and then same thing, just like you had this good rapport with your patients, right? And they became comfortable with you, and they never had a bad experience with you, which probably lent to having good experiences with other tattooed people at that point, right? Because then they're like,
Right.
well, my doctor's tattooed, he's cool as heck, right? Same thing. I guess I was a cool enough patient to where my doctor trusted me to tattoo him. So it was fun and an honor. Um, but with you being a doctor, and getting heavily tattooed, there's always the factor of this being a flesh wound, right? So with you getting heavily tattooed, especially in such a short period of time, talk to us about the healing process. And I know that's one of those really cool content pieces you put out, is how you're healing your tattoo, the different types, and how it's going. But what is some of the kind of the thought process that a doctor would be thinking about during a heavy tattoo session?
Yeah, good question. It really is about taking care of your health in the short term. I advocate for healthy lifestyle in general, but the healthier you can be, the easier it is to sit through a session, the better your body's going to accept the ink. and the more quickly you'll heal the piece. And so what I talk about that, it's, the typical stuff. If you can, minimize alcohol, I don't smoke, for example, all of those things I think really factor in, because it does put a big strain on your body, right? And your body's reacting to a foreign substance being introduced into it, and you have an immune inflammatory response. And that's often why people can get, especially with bigger pieces, tattoo flu, which I've experienced myself, that sensation where you feel really crappy for a day or two.
Mhm.
Um, so in that case, a lot of good hydration, and I took some ibuprofen, and that really helped me a lot. But
Mhm.
yeah, getting a good night's sleep, eating well, for getting just mentally prepared for a session is important. But you bring up a good point too. Before I started, when I talked about the piece I get honoring my daughter as being kind of
Mhm.
the start of my tattoo collecting. So at that point, I was a physician, and I did a lot of research before, because I wanted to make sure that what I was doing was safe and healthy and wasn't going to have any type of untoward health effects.
Yeah.
And really, I didn't find anything particularly concerning. I mean, there are, of course, issues with um, infection and allergic response, which I knew generally, and my thought was, go to a reputable person, vet
Mhm.
them, make sure, you can look at the equipment, right? Are they using sterilized equipment? Are they using opening new packages for you? So that to me seemed like a pretty easy thing to work through. And
Mhm.
helpfully for me, my best friend from medical school is a dermatologist. And so I asked him ahead of time, do you have any concerns, anything that you've seen in terms of people having problems from tattoos? And the only other thing he advised me about is that if you do have, especially darker pigment tattoos, it can be harder potentially to detect skin cancer at an earlier stage. So it's just going to
Mhm.
require much more vigilant monitoring, which
Mhm.
we should all
Mhm.
do anyway. But
Sure, sure.
beyond that, I felt very safe and comfortable.
I'm glad just that brings up the Sun Safety Inc., which was actually a organization that did it's a nonprofit organization that's been doing pretty interesting work with skin anomalies and contraindications, because we as tattoo artists do spend a lot of time, hours and hours in sections of people's bodies, and we're trained, if we're trained properly, you never tattoo over any sort of skin anomaly, any sort of mole, any sort of anything that could be of concern. That way,
Mm,
like you said, you don't camouflage something that then disappears, and you can't monitor it over the years, right? See if it changes shape or size or whatnot. But this organization, Sun Safety, which I think is great because they're educating tattooers what to look for. And then from there, if you do identify something, that's when you say, hey, maybe you should go talk to your dermatologist and take a look at
mm,
this a little more closely. So, but that falls right back into what you were just saying. You want to make sure that you're going to a professional, right? Somebody that knows what they're doing. They've got a good track record. If they do have licensure in their state and city and county, that they're up to date and current, following all those guidelines, because you're right. It is a flesh wound, and you got to make sure that we're knowing how to do a pretty flesh wound that's going to heal well.
yeah,
So when
exactly.
you mentioned tattoo flu, and that was a topic that came up at a tattoo convention I was just at up in Sturbridge, Massachusetts,
Mm,
and one of the tattooers was a little bit older. That was teaching a skin course, because it's mandatory to take to go to this convention. And he was talking about not overworking people's bodies, especially as they get older, not taking them through these full day 2-day sessions and such. Again, you're healthy and obviously got a good immune system and can heal a wound well. What did it take to give you the tattoo flu? Was it a multiple day session? Was it just a gnarly day? What was the cause of that?
yeah, it was getting tattooed heavily for 3 days in a 4-day
Ooh.
period.
Ouch.
Yeah, that was rough. It was actually that was the kind of the early stages of COVID, and
Oh
I was
wow.
this is like really the first couple months, when COVID was just pretty terrifying in a lot
Yeah.
of ways, and
Yeah.
I was certain, I was like, I am patient zero of COVID in my area, because I had Um, like really, I think my temp was up to like 105 and like really bad
Oh,
rigors. So it was right after tattoo shops around here could open after the initial closure. So it's probably that summer after COVID started. Yeah.
yeah. Man, that's again, it sounds like if you're dedicated and you want to do it, you could do it. Would there be any, I guess, tips, tricks, or other logistics you'd share with any collector that's looking to do a multiple day session like that?
I would definitely not start with that. If you have not been tattooed before, or you've had some smaller pieces or shorter sessions, I would really build up. I would make sure that at a minimum you've been able to sit through a 6 or 7 hour session. Ideally, you've been able to successfully sit through a couple of 6 or 7 hour sessions, and that also, if you've had some sessions on some harder areas, like your arm's one of the easiest places. So if you've
Mhm.
gotten through a back of the calf or stomach or ribs or whatever, I mean, there's a number of sensitive places, but I wouldn't like jump right into a 2 or 3 day rib piece if that's really your first tattoo. That's probably the biggest
Sure.
thing.
Mhm.
Um, and I think expectations with the artist, like what you think they're going to be able to accomplish, because it's a lot on them if you're getting work done from somebody in consecutive days, and how they work through. Are they going to take a lot of breaks? For me, I personally really hate breaks. I think it actually makes it harder. I always
Mhm.
like whatever, however much time I'm on break for, I'm dreading going back and starting up again. At least when I'm getting tattooed, I'm kind of in the mindset of, yep, this sucks, and it's just the mentality. So that's always a concern. If it's like a back-to-back thing, is the artist going to be more tired and want to take more breaks? It's something I like to kind of talk out ahead of time.
Mm. Mm. So you almost want to find a like a marathon tattooer. Somebody
Yeah,
doesn't smoke, doesn't need
right,
to eat a lot.
right. Yeah, yeah, no, and I've had Kelly Doty has done a few of my pieces, and she's a machine. I mean, one of my pieces, she tattooed me for, I think it was 10 or 11 hours, and we took one 5 minute break. And
Wow.
like, I know to a lot of people, that probably sounds horrific. For me, I was like, this is great. Like, it, perfect.
Say, as a tattoo artist, that sounds horrific.
Yeah, I know, right, exactly. I can't
uh,
imagine.
oh yeah, I could just imagine the back pain and the eye strain, but no, that's cool. And yes, there's some amazingly talented tattoo artists, not just in what they can do, but how they can do it. So that's definitely it's cool you've been able to experience that. And that segues into, like you said, I mean, you wish you had 100 bodies because you there's so many talented artists. Is there any like pieces or artists that I mean, obviously, you're going to say you love them all, and they've all done a great job. But any great experiences you'd like to talk about with any cool tattoo artists?
Well, yeah, I've become kind of friends with some. Timmy B and Lindsay Baker from his shop Night Owl in Massachusetts. Like, we've become buddies. He invited me to a Backstreet Boys concert last summer and a Faith Hill
Nice.
concert this coming summer. They're just such good people. That's one of
Mhm.
the things I've loved about tattoo collecting, is that I pick up the energy of everybody who's ever tattooed me, and I carry some piece of them with me. And
Mhm.
to a
Mhm.
person, people that have tattooed me have been incredible. Um, so yeah, those folks, Paul Booth, he and I have gotten to become pretty good friends
Wow,
actually,
that's
which
cool.
is it's like, even now, I mean, I'm such a tattoo nerd, but like on the days if like Paul shoots me a text, I'm like, holy crap, I get a text from Paul Booth, like we're just shooting the
Hmm.
shit. Like, it's still
Hmm.
kind of surreal. So
Oh
yeah, those are
yeah,
some of my coolest. Yeah, yeah.
that's really cool because yeah, Paul Booth was personally one of those people, one of those artists I looked up to as a young tattoo artist. 20 some years ago. And yeah, the fact that you're able to appreciate that is huge too. With the explosion and popularity of tattooing, which is awesome. They definitely, it's great that you're able to be a doctor and be heavily tattooed and be accepted, and it to be accepted across the globe now and all over television. It definitely highlights tattoo artists that are talented but can get on television, right? And people like Paul Booth, Gil Monty and Jack Rudy Bob Tyrell. These
Mhm.
artists, a lot of people won't know who they are because they're not on television, but they're the ones that have paved the way for the majority of those on television today. So it's awesome that you've invested that much time and energy to appreciate them, because they deserve it for sure. And that's awesome. I'd be jealous too. I'd be super stoked as well.
Yeah, it's
uh,
cool.
you mentioned a pretty interesting statement. You pick up their energy when you're getting tattooed with a tattoo. Yes, it's a very intimate process. I always feel like it's a bond we build, the tattoo artist and the client, because the tattoo artist is inflicting pain upon you, which, as you know, it's exciting the fight or flight response. Our natural desire is to fight or run away, but instead you must stay still and go,
Hmm.
and accept what's going on. So you're trusting this person to permanently mark your body, to permanently mark your appearance, and that's, like I said, it brings a nice bond. And if you find that good relationship, it's, you can really enjoy your time together. And when you say pick up energy, are you talking about vibes, or explain to me what your concept of energy is, especially coming from a medical practitioner?
Yeah. So what I mean by that is that um, when I get tattooed, the piece of art that's being put on me is shaping how the world perceives me, and it's shaping it in a very specific way, which is how the person that's tattooing me kind of perceives the world. So I am kind of that their how they process and see the world is being transmitted onto me, and then the world kind of sees me through those eyes. So that's kind of what I
Mm-hmm.
mean in terms of the energy. And in terms of like the sitting through the session, it's kind of parallel in some ways to some therapy that I provide for people, right? So some of what we do is helping people process painful past experiences or traumatic experiences. And again, it's that sort of fight or flight response where understandably those are hard things to do, and the instinct is to a lot of the time suppress it or repress it and not deal with it. But as a good therapist, it's sitting through and building a bond with the patients so they trust you, just like I trust the tattoo artist, to do something that's going to be very painful, but that's ultimately going to get me to my end goal, whether it's a physical change in my appearance or whether it's a change in how I perceive the world mentally or how I respond to my emotions. So I actually think there is kind of a parallel there.
100%. I imagine out of all your sessions, you've had tattooers tell you that some people have called them their therapist, right?
Mhm.
Their ink therapist. And yeah, sometimes you're putting somebody, or we're putting somebody through a painful situation, and it ignites a painful emotion, and then it's like, blah, they share with us things that they probably wouldn't share with anyone else. And I take that as an honor. It's an honor to be in that space, and same with yourself, because people are kind of sharing their internal secrets and trying to seek healing through it, and you're able to guide them through that in a obviously a skillful way. And for us, it's usually just drawing pretty pictures and going, man, that's crazy, man, that sucks, no shit.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. Yeah.
Well,
But
but that's the thing. What we know about psychotherapy, there's all sorts of different psychotherapy: cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, psychodynamic, so on and so forth. What we know is not the specific type of therapy doesn't matter so much in terms of predicting the success of the treatment. It's the relationship that the patient has with their therapist. That's actually the most important variable. And so what you're
hmm.
describing makes sense. You're spending hours with a patient, you're with a client, you're doing something very intimate, you're changing how they physically appear, you're inflicting pain, but uh, a lot of what you do is helping foster a sense of trust between them and you. So it makes sense that you have a good rapport with them, they're going to open up.
Hmm. No, that's yeah, I agree. It's the process is happening. We just don't get the title, but definitely,
Hmm.
I feel that the tattoo craft, which I'm sure you're well aware of, and most people know, it's been around forever. I mean, as long as we've been around. Before written history, I mean, we've been marking our flesh, and it has a sacred place with human beings. It's ingrained in our DNA. And there's something just alluring about art on the flesh, and either either repulses people or it really attracts people, and obviously it's attracting a lot of folks. And it's probably like the earliest form of some form of therapy, right? It was the tattoo artist, tattoo bond. That's and like I said, it's really cool to kind of hear this from your perspective, because you're right. What we do to people, it doesn't just change their physical appearance, but also changes the way they feel about themselves, and then the way that the world looks at them, and that then affects how they feel about themselves and how they interact with it. And I've seen, introverted clients become more extroverted people, to a degree, because they're more willing to show their body. Would you be able to speak to that for yourself? What do you think this has done for you and your perception of yourself in the world?
Oh, hugely, it's changed my self-esteem. And, I had significant issues with my confidence and self-esteem and how I perceived my body. And I was not the type of person who I would find every excuse possible to not like be in a swimming pool or go to a beach, so I wouldn't have to take my clothes off. I had struggles with obesity for much of my life. I mean, for a lot of my adult life, I was well over 300 pounds, and so that played
Wow.
a big role. So it's been about the past 4 or 5 years where I've gotten to healthy weight and I've maintained it.
Okay.
But some of like, you referenced some of the stuff I've posted on TikTok and Instagram, and if you told me 5 years ago I would be that open with allowing the world to see me, I would have said no, there's no way. So
Yeah.
it's allowed me to reclaim my body. And one thing I've thought of a lot is that for a lot of my life I felt that I was judged for being the fat guy, especially as a doctor. Like, you're sort of silently shunned by a lot of your colleagues if you're an overweight doctor. But I felt judged about something that I didn't feel like I had a lot of control over. And with the tattoos, I feel like, okay, you can judge me now, but at least it's more on my terms now. It's how I want
Yeah.
to be perceived, and you can judge me based on that. So it's been empowering, exactly.
Oh, I love that. No, it's definitely, you're right. I mean, now I imagine, I couldn't see you walking down the street with, maybe a tank top on. People are just like, oh, like find you fascinating. They want to come look at you, and I'm sure the same thing. You go to a tattoo convention, you probably get tons of attention because such amazing work all over your body. You probably get hounded quite a bit. So yes, I could. That's amazing to hear how it's really helped improve the self confidence and being able to kind of show the world your body. And just got to ask, the video you mentioned where you're spinning around, you do have like like some sumo shorts on. I mean, did you go all the way around, man? Did you go all up in there?
All up in there, yeah. I, In fact, yeah, Carl Grace and Paul Booth had the distinct honor of tattooing my groin, and
Oh wow. Uh,
Kelly Doty and Timmy and Lindsay did my butt. But yep, it's
that's cool.
pretty much all covered. Yep.
That's wild. That's cool. That just speaks volumes to your ability to take your your separate your mind and your body, right? To be able to withstand some of the fiery pain that had to inflict. It just again speaks volumes, and this is probably something that a lot of solid collectors like yourself maybe have. But what is, like, do you have like a mental ritual before you go into something that's crazy like that? Like I get an arm, like, yeah, whatever, that's not a big deal. But it's like kicking back, putting your legs up, and going, shit, here we go.
uh, for those, it really was, yeah, actually more like the modesty part, and not even so much for me, because I really have gotten to the point now where I feel pretty comfortable about my body. It was more like, I don't want it to be awkward for them.
Yeah.
I mean, truthfully, but like Carl and Paul have both been tattooing for decades. And so I don't think that honestly, either of them really batted an eye.
Sure,
But
sure.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. No, you're right. I mean, it's, I mean, sometimes people are very comfortable with their body, even to where it makes even us uncomfortable. Like, okay, I didn't have to see that. Thank you. uh, I made a note and I wanted to bring it up because I think it's quite astonishing, just from my experience with um, older generation that comes from Jewish lineage, and you even mentioned Holocaust survivors being tattooed, and tattoos have a very strong negative connotation in that heritage and that history, to the point where, I mean, I've met older folks that were, I mean, they were respectful, but definitely spoke down on tattooing. And the fact that
Mhm.
you have your body heavily tattooed, I mean, does this make it awkward for family reunions? I mean, you want to speak to that at all? Because I feel that was an interesting point.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. My family is really small, and so at this point, unfortunately, really a lot of the Holocaust survivors have passed away. So my grandparents were both Holocaust survivors. My mom
Wow.
was born in the United States like a year after they moved here, which is like a year after they were liberated from a concentration camp. So it is pretty close to home. And yeah, it's something I did think about a lot. I can still tell you my grandmother had the number 52,698, 52698 tattooed on her forearm, which apparently
Wow.
was, I don't know, some type of way they kept track of her when she was an inmate or prisoner. Um, but my thinking is similar to how I've thought about getting tattooed and reclaiming my body from when I didn't like it when I was obese, which is it's again it's empowering. Like she had this horrible mark put on her that was completely against obviously her will, and it signified so much horror and atrocity given what happens. Most of her family was killed. Whereas for me, I feel like again, it's reclaiming it. It's I'm choosing to do this to myself, and I
Mhm.
love the art. And so if I didn't do this thing that I wanted, then ultimately it's like letting the bad guys win, right? Because it's
Yeah.
saying, well, you committed this atrocity on my family, and now you're going to, in a much, much, much smaller way, obviously orders of magnitude smaller, but still, you're going to still have downstream effects on me, and get in the way of doing what I want to do. So that I did think about it. It wasn't an easy decision. My grandmother, both my grandparents passed away before I really started getting heavily tattooed. I'm not sure what it would have been like, honestly, had they been around. That it may have slowed me down at least.
Mhm. Oh, okay. No, no, that was actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was the wife of the gentleman who was kind of having some issues with my tattoo work. She, we were a part of a Toastmaster group's public speaking
Mm,
club, and so
mm,
very, very open and communicating. She was saying how it would be nice for him to be able to overcome that, right? To process that, move forward. And she did bring up, maybe if he got a tattoo and he realized it was a beautiful thing, it could change his mind. So, but I mean, obviously he didn't. And it's great that you're able to kind of look at it as a way to empower yourself, but also like show, that these old wounds can heal, right? And you can
mhm.
turn something that could have been, or that was horrible, and a practice that was used in a negative way, and now turn it into something that's empowering you and allowing you to do, um, you know you're definitely helping a lot of people. You're educating a lot of people about health and about tattooing, the process, and giving the ins and outs and such. So being able to turn that negative into a positive, and it's really a cool thing you've been able to do, which uh, which I'd love to kind of get into, because you're like advocating for tattoos in the medical world, right? You're
Mhm.
trying to share how cool it is to be um, how acceptable it is to be tattooed, and how it's a fine art, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's done these great things for you, and you've seen it transform, well, yourself and people around you. What was your initial mission when you started getting into sharing your journey? Just to have fun, or I mean, you have people asking you these kind of questions and you just want to kind of put it in a place where they can all digest it, or speak to that?
Yeah, good question. So Robert Foe, who has tattooed my outer arm sleeve, uh, he started tattooing me about a year ago. That's when he started the project, and he, during one of our sessions, said, you have kind of an interesting background. There aren't many doctors that are as tattooed as you, and there aren't that many people that are working on a bodysuit with the type of collection that you have. You have an interesting story to tell, and you have probably a lot of knowledge and experience that you could share. And so he really planted the seeds and encouraged me. And initially I was a bit reluctant because prior to all of this, I had really kept a very low social media or online presence. So I wanted to be really thoughtful before I did it. But I started thinking, when I get to the end of my tattoo journey, uh, and truthfully, I don't think I'll ever stop getting tattooed between getting things touched up or second passed or tweaked a little bit here or there. But when I'm effectively done the first draft, at least, it's going to be a big void, right? I've been getting tattooed, most of the times like twice a month for the past probably 3 or 4 years. And
Wow.
I wanted to have a way of filling that void because it has become almost not sacred. That's too strong a word, but it's become a huge part of my life. And I wanted to do it in a more meaningful way than just showing up at conventions and geeking out at stuff on Instagram and talking with my tattoo buddies. I mean, those are all cool things to do, but Robert did really help me see that I did have something potentially to offer, both in terms of passing on some knowledge, things that I've learned that nobody really ever taught me. I just kind of picked up along the way. And then also, yes, of course, advocating for doctors having tattoos. Yeah.
Mhm. Let me speak to both of those first. You're right. Not a lot of information out there for the collectors, right? On, usually it's the general instructions we give you. Make sure you eat a good meal and you have drink, you're hydrated and you're rested before you come to your tattoo. But you're talking about, focusing on your immune system and your diet and exercise and your health, right? Sharing with them, different types of healing methods and what could potentially happen with using different styles of aftercare. Also, where you go mentally and where you kind of prepare yourself, and I think it's invaluable because it is a scary thing, right? It's a fear-inducing practice. It causes the fight or flight. So some people
Mhm.
go into it very nervous, and to be able to see somebody that's a medical professional that's heavily tattooed, giving good, sane, common sense information and sharing your insight and your story, I'm sure it's invaluable to many. I mean, I think it needs to be done more because that would definitely help us tattoo artists with a lot of the education we have to share. Because sometimes, it's you don't think you have to tell people certain things, but then you're surprised when they like, I don't get it. I was wrestling in the dirt with my first tattoo. Why is it hurting? It's like, what? Do you think you'd ever like do more with that content? Like maybe some sort of, I'm not saying like a class, but maybe something a little bit more. I guess if you're gonna get tattooed, go talk to the ink shrink. He'll put you straight, Any
Yeah, no,
aspirations, you think?
yeah, I'd love to do something like that because there is such a gamut of things. I mean, just while you were talking, I was thinking about all these different things that I've learned. Like one example for me who's wanting to get extensively covered is uh, how you make sure everything flows well together, and what do you do if you have like awkward gaps. And these are things that I really thought about ahead of time, but I've had to get strange spots filled, and thankfully I developed good enough relationships with artists that people who probably ordinarily wouldn't take on these projects to do these weird little gap filler stuff did. So it's just that type of thing that I don't
Yeah.
know that you'd necessarily think about unless you had the experience. But yes, like imparting that knowledge, or the most popular TikTok video I've posted by far. It has like, for me, it's a lot. It's like over 1 million views, and it's
That's a
it's
lot.
literally it's literally like my recommendations for how I use a second skin product and the particular things that I look for to know when it's ready to come off. Because I've been the victim of at one point taking it off too early for one of my pieces, and at another point taking it off too late. And I think there really is a sweet spot to knowing when to take it off. I called it the Goldilocks principle in my little video. But what surprised me with that, A, just that it got as many views as it did, but B, the number of comments I get from people who were just deriding me and telling me how this is a terrible product and how could I be advocating for this and I'm an idiot and just scrub it as hard as you can when you get home. I mean, all of these like really bad, in my opinion, ways of healing. But even if I accepted them at face value and said, okay, they work for you, why are you coming here and talking about it? This is not, I'm trying to share a very simple concept. This is what to look for to take the second skin off. And people have all these, and so really what it got me thinking about was I think that there really are kind of two groups of people when it comes to getting tattooed. There are the people like me who are collectors who are going for extensive, if not full body coverage, going to, um, world famous artists. And then there are people who are, maybe not aspiring for as much coverage or not necessarily wanting to, go and have to travel or have to spend lots of money on going to big name artists, but still are invested in doing it right and getting a good tattoo and something that they're going to be happy with. But it's two very different groups of people is what I've come to learn. And so really, I think, yes, the short answer is I would love to be a resource both for people who are very new to getting tattooed, kind of novices, and also for people who are pretty experienced, but there are maybe some more of these nuanced tips that I could kind of share.
Yeah, no, that would be amazing. I mean, is there any plans for this, or is it just would be a novel idea? Just kind of curious if we should prepare it for this information.
I don't have anything specific in the works. I've been, sharing a number of smaller videos on TikTok in particular with some of my tips, and some of my opinions on things as well. Um, but no, I mean, I don't. I know Fawn Baker just gave a tattoo collecting seminar at Hell City this past weekend, and that type of thing. I mean, I don't know if there would ever be a place for me to do something like that there in that capacity or on YouTube. But yes, I nothing definitive, but something that I would like to do soon.
That's awesome. Well, I will. I'm going to hold you to that, Matt.
Yeah.
One day we're going to see that from you. And I've got some ideas we'll talk about off camera.
Sure.
I'd love to get your perspective real quick about that second skin, just because I had mentioned when I was in Sturbridge at this show, this educator who was teaching about the skin course was adamantly, tattooing for 30 plus years, adamantly against the whole second skin, all about, the gauze bandages, which personally, I do like to use Derm Shield because I've found that it is an amazing product and I've had great results with it. But what is your medical opinion about that?
I think really what you're trying to prevent in the first couple of days after you get a tattoo is an infection first and foremost. And from my standpoint, a scab. I know some people are big proponents of dry healing and think having the tattoo scab as part of the healing is the way to go. Just from personal experience, I had a not great result doing that going back many, many years. So what I'm always looking to do is how do I prevent infection? How do I prevent it from scabbing? I do think in general, the second skin type products, if applied correctly and used correctly, that's the big piece, are excellent for both of those things. And that's what I was talking about, the Goldilocks principle in terms of not taking it off too soon or too late. Because that can, at least from my experience, lead to some more actually scabbing happening, especially when I left it on, I think, too long. But there really is no clearly right way. I mean, even to this day, I heal different. I use different techniques for different pieces that I'm healing. I just got my hand done a few weeks ago, and I used second skin. I put it. The piece that the artist put on, we were done that session. I just kept on for about 4 days and I took it off and cleaned it. It was good to go. I realized that's not how the second skin people exactly advise you how to apply it, but that's worked well for me. But then my other my right arm here, which I also just had a lot of work done on, I didn't put anything on it. I washed it a couple times a day, and I put just a very small amount of like the tattoo product on it,
Mhm, mhm,
tattoo aftercare product. So
mhm.
really, it's whatever works best for the particular artist, because they know how their stuff heals. And that's what I always tell people who ask me: listen to your artist first and foremost.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
then if you started, and I'm going to somewhat contradict myself in saying that at the beginning, absolutely. Nowadays, I kind of know what works for me after a lot. I mean, over 500 hours of experience and a lot of back and forth with my artists. So I do tweak things a little bit for myself individually.
Yeah. No, no, great answer. I mean, and you're right. There is no one size fits all. Just like our
Mm-mm.
bodies are completely unique, and the situation's completely unique. Not only the placement of the tattoo, but the amount of trauma that was inflicted, the amount of layering sessions. There's so many factors. But it's definitely there's always a problem when it's this way or the highway, right? And it
Yes.
sounds like you're getting some of that kind of friction on your comments on TikTok. But apparently, I've learned that on TikTok, if you get negative comments, that builds the algorithms in a better way. So I guess the more the
Of
merrier.
course.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I should be happy then.
Yeah. That means you're doing good things.
All
uh,
right.
earlier we went on to one subject, but one thing you mentioned, it's very important. It's pivotal to your story, but advocating for tattoo doctors and earlier in our conversation last week, you were talking about a group of tattoo doctors that you engage with and obviously speak highly of and are friends with. I mean, what is that dynamic like, and is what called you to want to now advocate for this demographic of people?
Just my own personal experience, I had a lot of hesitancy for years about getting work done on my hands in particular. And I finally pulled the trigger with my right hand almost a year ago, and then with my left hand, about a month or so ago. And I wouldn't have waited nearly as long as I did, even through this whole 10-ish years of collecting. I probably would have had the work done. It just would have made sense with how my sleeve looks to have had it pulled onto my hand a long time ago, but I never wanted to for fear, really. And I've seen in the last couple of years there have been a lot of efforts societally to be more inclusive and more understanding of people of
Mhm.
different backgrounds. And by no means am I a marginalized person or anything like that. I don't want
Sure.
to in any way make that equation. But I have seen this kind of sea change in society, and I've thought, look, I think it's genuine. I really do think people are becoming, not everybody, but there is more acceptance. So I thought, you know, there always has to be a first person, right?
Mhm.
There's always somebody that takes that chance, and I'm not going to be living a life that's true to myself if I don't. And so I pulled the trigger and getting my hands done, and that really got me thinking. Like, I don't want, if there have to be other people like me. I'm a human being. There have to be other doctors that like tattoos as much as I do. I'm not that unique. And if I could do something that would make it easier for them, so that if they, years from now, or sometime down the line, wanted to get their own work done, that they wouldn't have to necessarily wait as long or have those concerns in general, right? I'm sure there are a lot of people that have never gotten tattooed or extensively tattooed that have wanted to, but understandably haven't because of fear. So that drove me a lot. And then Sarah Jane, I don't know her last name. She's pretty well known. She, I think, has been in Inked magazine. She was, I think, like Miss Inked Australia. I might be getting the exact titles wrong, but she's pretty well known as a tattoo collector. She also owns a tattoo shop. She's
Mhm.
also an orthopedic surgeon in Australia.
Nice. Nice.
And she got a lot of publicity maybe about 2 or 3 years ago. And truthfully, I looked up to her a lot. I thought, holy smokes, this girl, I mean, she's covered like her throat, her hands, her fingers. And I thought, if she can do it, if she's brave enough to do it, then, what the heck, I'll give it
Mhm.
a shot too. And it's a little bit different. I mean, I don't know exactly how tattoos are perceived in Australia compared to the United States, but I did figure we had that common bond of both being physicians and that it was possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. You did mention though you have like a group you engage
Other
with.
group.
I don't know if it's a social media group or
Yep.
and what is that dynamic like? Just talking about your tattoo ink, talking about the medical world in tattoos. Give us a little inside scoop.
Yeah, it covers all those things. So she's actually one of the members of the group. I think there are about 8 or 9 of us. We've got a person who's a plastic surgeon, primary care doctor, musculoskeletal radiologist, just off the top of my head. But we talk about everything from tattoo nerdery stuff, who's got appointments coming up, what they're doing, what they're planning, sharing the work that we just got done, um, to talking about issues pertaining to professionalism. For example, one of the people in our group, the plastic surgeon, just got some pretty extensive. I mean, he's got his throat and his full sleeves, his hands covered, and he just had some work done on his head actually, which really surprised me. And he kind of shared with us a little bit about what went into his decision making on that and how he felt that it was with a particular patient population that he works with, something that would in some ways actually validate them. He does a lot of surgeries for transgender individuals, and so that's kind of a part of society that historically has been marginalized. And so in some ways, actually him being a heavily tattooed doctor like with me has helped him connect with those individuals. So it's that type of stuff that we share in our group.
That's cool. That's cool. Has with I think our initial conversation, and I got to bring it up. I mean, with the whole new federal law that came through, the Modernization of Cosmetic Regulation Act, which is now going to allow the FDA to scrutinize all tattoo products because tattooing is considered a cosmetic procedure and use cosmetic products, which for the most part is not a bad thing. I mean, really, this new law is just about safety substantiation, good manufacturing processes, labeling, and lot numbers and adverse reactions systems. Great stuff. The concern is obviously around any sort of diagnosis of rules, right? And just being able to properly regulate and give us in our manufacturer regulations that make sense, which again is more about the products, but the fact that the tattoo products are now being scrutinized, which lends to maybe the thought process that tattooing could be dangerous of some form or fashion. Is that ever a topic or conversation that comes up with your tattoo doctor group?
Not that specifically, but we have talked about if folks have had any concerns about any health related issues from tattooing. And the only concerns that people have had are similar to the ones that I had shared initially, and concerns about infection and allergic reaction, stuff like that, but nothing beyond that. And truthfully, we just don't know right now. There's not enough data about. I mean, there's some growing data about people who have tattoos have certain elevations in some lab markers, but there's no clinical significance to that. There are a lot of times where I could show you, well, this lab marker is high or low, and nothing to do with tattooing, and this doesn't mean anything clinically. So, like you were saying, tattoos have been around for millennia, and even there's been a huge uptick in I don't know, probably a decade or 15 years. And it's not like people are dropping dead. I mean, it's not something to be flip about, but I think whatever happens in terms of regulating the tattoo industry, it needs to be done, in my opinion, with good science, not politics, and with input from all of the stakeholders. So some of the stakeholders being tattoo artists, and maybe, I don't know, even clients. I mean, because if there's going to be something that happens that significantly curtails my ability to get tattooed, I mean, I'd like to at least have a say in as somebody who's potentially receiving this, if I know all of the facts, just like I educate my patients if I'm prescribing them a medication, I go through what I'm expecting the benefits are going to be, and what are the potential side effects or adverse effects. And I want them to make an educated decision that is best for themselves. Similar for me as a tattoo client. I want the data. I want to know. I obviously know what my perceived benefits are. Hopefully, my artist pulls off my vision. But I know what my perceived benefits are, and I just want a well-informed view of what the risks are. But I want to be able to still be empowered to make that decision for myself, and I don't want somebody else determining for me that the risks are somehow going to outweigh the benefits.
100% agree. And no, and you mentioned proper science, and currently our response to that, the Alliance Professional Tattooists, which is the tattoo artists trade organization, we've created a pigment committee. It's specifically geared to provide said data and scientific research for the FDA and for you and for everyone in all realms of tattooing, because all of the previous information is going to be antiquated, right? It's we as tattoo artists and you as a collector are not seeing any sort of health crisis, so what is the point of having these more strict regulations? And we want to decipher if it is something that's scientifically reasonable or if it's more regulation politically bound, right? So the APT Pigment Committee is actually creating a retrospective observational study where we are going to be interviewing and working with a third party, which is a non-biased organization that's going to interview and survey tattoo collectors with 20 plus years of tattoos and be able to identify if they have any sort of health contraindications or basically just kind of get a profile of them and compare them to the general population. Just like you're saying, there's some markers that are higher and low in tattooed people as they're higher and low in not tattooed people. And essentially we want to show that, hey, there's not a big, huge difference between the two, right? Just because you're heavily tattooed doesn't make you any more risk than somebody who, doesn't have tattoos. And so the fact that you're very interested in being proactive with your medical designation and background and I mean, this whole clout, especially when it comes to navigating conversations with the government, I would definitely love to invite you to the Pigment Committee at some point and kind of weigh in with your medical expertise and ideas. Because again, this isn't specifically just the tattoo artists. This is tattoo artists, medical practitioners, and manufacturers, and ex-FDA. And I mean, we all have a drive to do exactly what you're saying. Make it to where we can allow our clients to make the most educated decisions on what they're doing and be able to provide them with the most data we can. And now it's time for us as the industry to take on that responsibility and provide it and not wait for others to do it. So I would love to invite you to that. I think that would be you'd be invaluable for sure.
Yeah, I'd love to participate.
Very cool. I want to kind of start wrapping us up, but I do want to touch on a topic with you getting so many tattoos and getting tattooed by, the high echelon of tattoo artists. And not only that, got to get there, right? Fly to them, stay, eat, travel. I mean, you've got to be investing a lot of money, and I'm not going to ask any specific numbers, right? But you recognize the value in investing in your tattoo work. I mean, that makes a difference, right?
Huge difference. Yeah. And it's one that I sometimes struggle with when people think about nickeling and diming their tattoos, because you're going to, in all likelihood, get a significantly inferior result, and you're wearing it for the rest of your life, unless you want to get it lasered, which is its own kettle of fish. It's also sometimes people just get penny wise, pound foolish on this stuff. People have thought, well, geez, you're going to go fly to X, Y, and Z place. And it's like, yes, true, but I do it as economically as possible. I usually stay in hotels that my wife probably would be horrified to see me sleeping in, but I cut as many corners as possible. And really, at the end of the day, it's a small fraction of what the tattoo work is ultimately going to cost anyway. So it's really been the only hobby that I've had that I've spent any amount of money on as an adult that I can think of. I mean, I have other hobbies. I'm a runner. I'm into astronomy, things like that, but not things that are hugely expensive. So, and years ago, I picked up a lot of overtime shifts and so on and so forth. So yes, I did I was deliberate in knowing that I was going to be investing quite a bit of money in this for sure.
Mhm. No, that's, but um, the topic came up because we were talking a little bit about that whole tattoo gate situation, right? And the client that really got screwed over by a poorly designed rough draft, and just the whole situation was horrible. I mean, have you ever done that though, where you've wanted to get something tattooed and it required a lot of work? Did you ever do any paying for art, the designing process, or have you ever experienced anything like that before, or has it always just been straight tattoo?
Yeah, I've never had to pay like outside of either an hourly rate or a session rate. I've never had to pay for any type of design. The people I've gone to, I think, have essentially built that into either their hourly rate or their session rate. Um, I am not an artist. I have some sense though of how much time you all put into the work you do that we as clients often never see, or we only see a snippet of. And I'm not like globally opposed to the idea of people being compensated for their time if that works for them and their client base.
Mhm.
I think that there are ways of doing it, potentially really effectively. Like, for example, from a client's perspective, like if you said, I want to charge, X dollars per hour, that's my design rate. Like, I think that's pretty fair. And then that gives you as a client a lot of or as much really input as you want in the design as possible. If you want to nitpick everything, and some people do, and more power to them, going into it, like, okay, it's like working with a lawyer who has billable hours. Like, yep, every time I contact the person, it's going to add up, but I need that for my piece to look just like I want it to. Other people would say, general concept, you do it with what you want. I don't want to spend all the extra money on paying for design, and that's fine too.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, I think it's very similar to your aftercare
Mhm.
concept. One size does not fit all, right? Every
Right.
situation is going to be different. I mean, some clients do want I mean, you nailed it. Some clients want to nitpick the shit out of their tattoos. They want to design it 10 different times and then come back to the original design, right? And they won't
Mhm.
recognize the fact that it took us anywhere from 16 to 36 hours of our own free time
Right.
designing something. And then, yeah, we have some amazing clients just like, sweet, do it, whatever you want. It's cool. So it just kind of goes back to, you know, I, I think that it's important that we discuss that there's not, it, the the tattoo gate situation was a bad situation, and that was something gone
Mhm.
wrong. But there could be potential for clients and artists to have relationships where it makes sense to do some sort of collaborative art process to allow them to feel comfortable and confident in the artwork. And it's one of those things. I think it's important that as an educator to clients, to share with them that, hey, just because you hear your tattoo artist talk about an art collaboration or an art designing process doesn't mean you need to run screaming. Hear them out first and see
Mhm.
what the process entails. Same thing the opposite way. If they're like, whatever, well, I'll just draw some on you, that may also be a good flag as well. So uh but I do appreciate your time, Matt. It's been really awesome getting to chat with you and get to pick your brain a little bit more. And I feel like we could keep going on, but I want to be respectful of your time and potentially have a more in-depth conversation later as well. But you've you've really um, been great at articulating something that needs to be shared, because tattooing is, over the last 15 years, personally, I think it's since the that first tattoo magazines came out, right? And then Miami Ink
Mhm.
started hitting the ground, and then once it went televised, it went nuts. And the tattooing has become just phenomenal, and you're a prime example. You've got amazing work on your body, and we as tattoo artists are being able to be educated by each other and growing and gleaning, right? But there's not a lot of education for the client, right? Maybe those is almost like you in the know, right? Oh, you're a collector, you guys know the stuff. And it's really cool that you're willing to kind of step out of your once uncomfortable zone and now be comfortable, and kind of take off the clothes to the world, share with what you got, and give them that input. And I think personally, as a tattoo artist, not to mention, I'm sure clients would agree, would love to see more information, and methodical information, like I said, for the first timer or for the big time tattoo sessions, or those different healing processes. I think that would be amazing to get from you.
Yeah, I'd love to share that. And yeah, I have a lot of ideas, and look for that stuff coming, because that is the direction that I'm ultimately headed in.
Awesome. Awesome. Very cool. Well, I definitely would love to, once that stuff starts coming out, and once this interview comes out, I'll definitely share it on all of our platforms. We'll be, splicing it up and sharing it on those as well. And that way we're going to keep you accountable, Matt, so you can
Please do.
educate the next generation of tattoo collectors so they can have amazing tattoo work like you. Again, thank you so much for your time, Matt. And I look forward to having further conversations and seeing more of your content.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.